I call to order the joint meeting of the Attleboro and Norton Democratic Committees, and I'm saying welcome to everyone on this Zoom link. I am here with Ellen Parker, Vice Chair of the Attleboro Democratic Committee, to provide you with information on the 5 ballot questions that will be on the November 5th ballot. I want to just hold up. I happen to have a ballot. I am going to vote in person, but tonight. And you can see that the questions are lengthy, front and back. So hopefully after we have this meeting, you will know what everything you need to know about the questions and be able to go right into the voting booth and know whether you're voting yes or no. So I now would like to introduce Ellen. And Ellen is going to introduce our first speaker on question 1, which is auditing the legislature. So Ellen.
Yeah, so first I'd like to say it's great to see so many of the Attleboro folks here, and our chair Chris Frappy is here. So it's great to, have a joint meeting with the Norton folks to, bring more people in and, to have a good forum like this. And so we are lucky to have our state auditor with us today, and she's been working for a couple of years on her ballot initiative, and she's here to talk about that with us. So, Diana?
Oh, she's muted. Hold on.
You're muted.
Okay.
Can we get her unmuted?
Yeah, can we get her? Diana Zoglio. Oh, here she is right down here.
I can't unmute her.
Oh, she's gonna do it herself.
She muted herself.
Ellen, is she, can we tell her that she's muted?
Yeah, well, let me text her.
Text her and tell her she's muted. She probably didn't notice.
Oh. She's got some technical issues and she needs to log out and back in.
Okay, so while we're waiting, I'm just going to ask Evan. I remember because I saw Evan. Evan, you did a video presentation on Channel 7, I think it was. So is this common to audit a legislature in the states?
There are states where the state auditor's office will oversee certain aspects of legislative activity, but always with legislative compliance and acceptance and assent. So we looked around, we couldn't find any examples where a state auditor would audit their state legislature without consent or over the objection of the legislature, which seems to be the most likely scenario here in Massachusetts, where the legislature has been explicit in their rejection of being audited by the state auditor.
So this is not the usual thing then?
No, this would be something new in the nature of the relationship between an executive branch officer, the state auditor, and the legislature.
Now, did I hear you say that they said, maybe it wasn't you, maybe the legislature said they feel they already have some auditing going on?
They do say that. When people hear the word audit, they often think of financial audits. They think, IRS audits checking the numbers. And that's really what they have going on. The comptroller will come in and look at their books. So they do get an official audit in that sense, but that's not really what the state auditor does. And I'm sure she'll speak to this. What state auditor does is performance audits. She looks at whether various bodies are following their own rules and state rules about, like, how you buy office furniture, right? You can't just go to Staples and pick up office chairs. If you're working in the legislature, there are a whole set of rules, and the auditor's job is to make sure you're following those rules. So it's not really about finances. And it's not clear that the legislature is doing that kind of oversight of their own activities.
So this is something new for Massachusetts.
Would be for any state.
Okay, thank you. Ellen.
So maybe we want to skip to the next
That's
question.
what I was just going to say.
Right.
While we're waiting for the auditor, to fix up her technical issues, I'm going to go on to question 2. We actually have 2 presenters on question 2. Elimination of the MCAS as a high school graduation requirement. Glenn Kuchar, Executive Director of the MASC, and Dennis Norton both are a yes vote on question 2. MASC is the Massachusetts for School Committees, and let me tell you about Dennis. Most of us probably know Dennis for years, but okay. Are you back?
I am so sorry, everybody. I don't know what happened. My computer is freezing and unfreezing, and there's all sorts of things happening.
We're
Thank you.
going to go to question 2,
go
but we'll
with
go
her.
back to you.
Go ahead.
All
I'm
right.
here. Thank you.
Oh, no, stay.
Stay. Dennis, are you okay with that?
I am okay with it, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
all right. Thank you.
I'm dying to hear Diana's presentation as well.
All right, so go right ahead, Diana.
Okay, well, how many minutes do I have?
Ellen is governing your time.
Madam Chair, how many minutes are you giving me?
About 10 minutes?
Yeah, about
Sure.
10 minutes.
All right, folks. Well, this is a pretty simple question. It simply just says the state auditor shall have the explicit authority to audit the state legislature. It inserts the words including the general court into the current language of the law, which already says that we are to audit all departments of the Commonwealth. We have audited the state legislature over 100 times throughout history. My staff have been tremendous in uncovering those audits and posting them on our website so everyone can see. I do want to give a shout out to Bill Bowles, one of my tremendous auditors who is, I believe, on this call tonight. Hi, Bill. Great to see you on this call. You're doing a great job. Thanks for all your work in our office. Thank you. But our staff has done a tremendous job of uncovering those audits that we have indeed conducted since the inception of the auditor's office back in 1849. We are simply looking to reinstate the practice that's always taken place in what are called performance audits of the state legislature. The state legislature, actually, which has been left out of every analysis on this issue, while they have repeatedly tried to suggest that our office simply doing our jobs is supposedly unconstitutional, in their opinion, and violates some sort of separation of powers, the state legislature actually audits the executive branch agencies with a post-audit and oversight committee. I was speaking with former Senator Mark Pacheco recently, or not former, he's about to be former, he's retiring right now. But Senator Mark Pacheco, who is the Dean of the Senate, he's been there the longest out of anybody. He's a strong supporter of question 1. And what he said to me was that he can't believe that folks are going around talking about how they think that this is supposedly unconstitutional, citing the fact that the legislature actually audits the executive branch through their post-audit and oversight committee with subpoena authority, and that they conduct performance audits of executive branch agencies. He reminded me that when he was the chair of the post-audit and oversight committee, that he actually called forward the former auditor, Joe DiNucci, to come before his committee during an audit hearing that he was conducting when the Big Dig project was going on, and required that the auditor come out and provide testimony and documents that he needed in order to conduct his performance audit of the situation that was occurring. So this is part of a system of checks and balances. The legislature is the only department of government that claims that they believe that they are exempt from an audit that every other state entity is subject to. Even our courts agree with the auditor's interpretation of the law that they are also subject to these audits. I will say, and I could hear Evan. Hi, Evan, if you're on the call, good to hear from you. I can't see you right now, but I did get to hear a little bit while I was trying to work out my technical difficulties about this issue of supposedly, these other legislatures having to grant permission before they can be audited. I will say I understand that conversation. But I think that it's important that we talk about it from a different perspective, which is not that you have any legislator or any legislatures giving permission slips to their auditors to come in and to conduct an audit. That certainly isn't the case. I guarantee if you go out and you look for permission slips being signed by people in the legislature, that's not happening anywhere. What is the case, rather than saying that we're the only state who's seeking to do this without the permission of the state legislature with some permission slip, it's important to say that it's actually the fact that Massachusetts is the only legislature who is refusing to comply with an office of state auditor's audit. So that's what the issue is. They're the only legislature in the nation where we can find an example of refusing to comply. Now, this is unfortunately not the only thing that we're infamous for being the only legislature on. We also are the only legislature in the country not to have a legislative services bureau. We're the only state in the country where our governor's office, judiciary, and legislative branch all claim exemption from the public records law. I think we're only one of 4 that claim exemption from the open meetings law as well, but we require that all of our municipalities follow those laws. So the legislature, unfortunately, is once again unique in the fact that they are the only example that can be found of where a legislature is outright just refusing to comply. When I do talk to state auditors in other communities in other states, they have said that they can't believe that this is getting the amount of attention that it has gotten in Massachusetts, that audits in their states are so basic and so commonplace that they're just considered a matter of routine and that they barely make the press. So once again, we are simply trying to do an audit that every other state entity receives. This is contrary to what you will hear naysayers say, not a constitutional issue. We've been actually trying to go to court to prove that point over the last year and a half, but we've been denied that opportunity. So we brought this issue to the ballot in order to give you, the voters, the opportunity to weigh in on what you think about getting access to things like financial receipts, because we indeed do look at finances as well. We look at issues pertaining to discretionary spending. We look at whether or not folks are maintaining their receipts accurately so that we can compare the financial documents that they are keeping or not keeping with what they're claiming to have spent on the comptroller's website. We do a reconciliation of their documentation, lack thereof, with what's on the website. And we are able to look at state funding in terms of contracts that are executed on behalf of taxpayers by folks in positions of power, and whether or not those contracts were executed legally or not. I'll give one example before I wrap up my pitch for question 1. We were able to go into the Convention Center Authority recently, and we were able to audit what the Convention Center was doing regarding their state contracts and their procurement process. And we uncovered that they were actually executing state contracts in the hundreds of thousands of dollars unlawfully, some with no bidding process, even though it was legally a requirement on them. We found that non-disclosure agreements were being distributed unlawfully. We found a non-disclosure agreement that was executed to the tune of $1.2 million unlawfully to conceal allegations of racial discrimination and retaliation. We can't do that in the state legislature. We can't see what's going on behind that curtain. And those are not documents that just should be shown to the auditor's office, by the way. Those are documents that should be accessible to the taxpayers of Massachusetts. You should know whether or not your tax dollars are being spent legally. So when we get denied access to receipts, it's not just the auditor's office. It is the general public that gets denied access to those receipts. We did just conduct our performance audit in accordance with government auditing standards, which again, folks like Bill Bowles on this call knows very well. And we were really excited that the team did such a tremendous job at highlighting areas that they were able to make recommendations on for the state legislature. And then they highlighted areas where the legislature refused to comply with the audit. So you can all look at that. That is up for folks to view if you have questions about what a performance audit looks like. But friends, at the end of the day, this is about working to increase transparency. We know that the legislative leadership team may push back on this after the fact. They may try to overturn this. I know our friend Dennis here is well aware of the speaker's comments last week, talking about how he's going to see how big the margins are before considering whether or not he wants to overturn the will of the people on question 1 and question 2. Please do not let the words of these folks discourage you from going and voting your conscience. We very much should feel instead inspired by those words that we really need to get those margins up to send a loud and clear message to legislative leaders about what our expectations are, that we fully hope that they will respect the will of the people on these issues and work together alongside of us to make government work better for those it's meant to serve. So please go to vote your conscience, vote for what you think is right. It is immoral and unethical that anybody in a position of power up on Beacon Hill deny access to basic information like financial receipts and documents or processes and procedures in regarding what's happening up on Beacon Hill. So let's vote for change. Let's vote for transparency. Let's fight for what's right and get through November 5th. And then let's circle back and make sure that we continue to push for what's right even after Election Day. Thank you.
So are you willing to take some questions?
Sure.
Does anyone have a question for the auditor? You can either raise your hand or raise your electronic hand.
Lauren has a question.
Okay, go right ahead.
Hi, thank you for joining us today. I had actually 2 questions. You were in the legislature, and now you're gratefully our state auditor. And the question I have is, what is it you expect to find out of this audit? I mean, coming from the legislature, you were probably privy to seeing things that probably made you very cautious and want to take this tack. And I was wondering if there was anything in particular that really spurred you on in terms of something you think that the rest of this Commonwealth needs to find out about the legislature in terms of pursuing this request for the audit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything in particular, Warren, besides more broad-based, ideas of what could be potentially problematic that they're concerned about. While they repeatedly try to point to this supposed non-existent issue concerning the separation of powers, really what I think their issue is, because they know very well that they do performance audits of the executive branch, and this is why they haven't taken this to court. They haven't taken this to court because they know that their argument is a very weak argument, and if they're going to try to strip away the powers of the auditor's office, then the question is going to come up about what to do about their powers over the executive branch. So I don't think they're willing to have that discussion in court. But I think that to your question and to the point that you're making, I would have to imagine that their issue is first and foremost maintaining all power and just making sure that they don't have to answer to anybody else but themselves. I think that that's frankly the number one issue with the Speaker and Senate President, because I do know a lot of legislators who would welcome an audit and they don't have a problem with it. And they say essentially, even if you don't think that we have to necessarily comply, why not just do so to instill, public trust and for the sake of transparency, to demonstrate that we, very much want to be transparent and answer any questions that folks might have, whether it's the auditor's office or whether it's any member of the general public, right? There are legislators that support that. There could be some challenges in state procurement, is what folks have off the record said to my office and other folks, that they're nervous about, some of the way that those state contracts have been going out, that the financial receipts might not be in order. And there are obviously concerns about those non-disclosure agreements. That's information that I've actually been asking for to be made available for many years, that they consistently claim exemption on, and that they don't have to tell us how much money they're spending on those silencing agreements. So, those are just some things that have been mentioned, but, without having access to documents, really can't say what any of the issues are. These are all just issues that have been raised to us as been areas of potential concern. Really need to get access to documentations to just check everything out and make sure that everything's being done on the up and up, same way we do for other entities. One more example, and then I'll go to you, Cody. We in the UMass system, we audit their use of credit card expenditures. And essentially, we've looked at whether or not they are using their credit cards appropriately in accordance with their own standards and the law. And we are able to go through their receipts and make sure that everything's in order and being documented appropriately for their credit card expenditures, their discretionary spending. The fact that we can't do that has raised some eyebrows, that we can't even get access to basics like those receipts just to verify. If you call my office and ask me for a receipt about something we spent money on, those receipts are there. They're a matter of public record. We show the general public. We get public records requests quite often. So even basic information like that is where there's a concern.
Those are things that are not picked up in the audit that is made public?
They're not making that information public. Yeah, even their receipts for their transactions. They'll post what their transaction was and what their claim regarding that transaction is. But it's the comptroller's office to make sure that that information is posted, that their claimed expenditures are posted, and that money going in and out is tracked. What the auditor's office does is we are able to go in, and as part of our performance audit, we are able to get access to that information, and we ask them for their documentation, also known as receipts, to verify what the claimed expenditure was. So if they said we spent $2,000, on catering for a staff event, we can go in and we can ask for that receipt, for the documentation, for an itemized list of expenditures, and make sure that everything was appropriately documented in accordance with their own rules and in accordance with the law. That's what we do for other entities. We can't get access to that. Those are matters of public record in state entities across the board who are subject to public records. Those are public records in your cities and towns. I'm happy to have the endorsement of the mayor of Attleboro, Kathleen DeSimone, who was walking with me the other day when I was walking across the state to highlight this issue. And she's a strong advocate. And she said, man, I'm subject to the public records law. If you come in and you wanted a receipt or something documented to back up, just to verify that everything's being done correctly, that's given to you. It's problematic that you can't get access to those things in the state legislature.
Thank you.
Cody.
Hi, Diana. Thanks so much for taking the time tonight to go through this. Two questions for you. The first is, how many years back would you start with? Obviously, this being the first, if it passes, how far back are you looking to go? And then follow-up question to that would be, what's the recourse for anything that's discovered to be out of compliance or anything that's, maybe not on the up and up?
So the audit that we just posted looked at the last legislative session. They did try to go back some years regarding those non-disclosure agreements. I don't know the exact year, so I don't want to say offhand, but I can send you the document if you want to just shoot me a quick, have Ellen shoot me a quick text message and we'll send you the document. I think it was 10 to 13 years, more or less, that was in line with another audit that we're doing that's looking at non-disclosure agreement use across state government. So we're actually auditing the governor's office right now on those NDAs. We're auditing, various agencies on the use of those NDAs. So we are going back to that particular issue. And the audit that we looked at looks at the last legislative session. So if this does pass, we would start there and potentially extend it forward to cover, any time that would pass between now and when this law gets approved. But I want to run that by my staff and make sure that everything's being done according to standards. So I'm not going to commit to anything on this call about a time frame. I need to run that by the pros in my office who have been there for a lot longer. Some of them than I've actually been alive. I have folks working in my office, so we'll run it by the pros and get back to you, Cody. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And just what would be the recourse for anything that you find that's potentially out of compliance?
So the only thing that our office is able to do is make recommendations, which we actually did in the audit that we released of the legislature, where we made recommendations about, reinstating a legislative services bureau, making their website more accessible. We're able to make recommendations like we did at the convention center, which was to follow the law and review their policies. Now, if there is anything that's unlawful, we refer that to the Attorney General's office, because our office does not have enforcement authority. We're essentially, kind of like public service journalism for all of you. We go in, we get the documents, we write the reports, we can make recommendations, but we can't enforce the law. So if there is something that is deemed out of, line with what the statute says, and it's deemed to be really problematic, we would refer that to the office. Yes.
Thank you so much for all the information and the presentation. Evan has to leave, so I'm going to have to go to him.
Time. Go ahead. I got it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much
Thank you.
for your presentation and for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Given us a lot to think about.
Good to see you, Evan.
Okay, Evan, I'm going to call on you next because I see that you have a time commitment. Is that true?
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize.
Okay, so I'm going to go to you next, and so you're going to let me just explain that you're from the policy so people understand where you're
Yeah,
from.
so I run a nonpartisan research center at Tufts called the Center for State Policy Analysis. And one of the things we do is we do research on all 5 ballot questions. We don't endorse, we don't take sides, but we try to help voters understand the best arguments, yes and no.
So you have 2 questions that I wanted you to talk about. One had to do with the minimum wage, and the other had to do with the Uber and Lyft drivers who were made and the unions.
Yeah, so questions 3 and 5.
Right.
Where do you want me to start?
3.
3. So this is the right of rideshare drivers to form a union question. And the thing to understand as background is that if you drive for Uber and Lyft, and that's who we're talking about here, not all gig workers, but specifically rideshare drivers, you can't form a union right now because you're considered an independent contractor, not an employee. And as you could imagine, a group of independent contractors working together to set prices is collusion, right? It raises anti-competitiveness concerns. So that's not allowed, or it's not allowed unless we do what question 3 envisions, where the state steps in and says, you know what, we're going to suspend all of our concerns about competitiveness, collusion. We're going to let drivers form a union across all the companies. And they'll be on one side of the table, right? The representative of all the drivers. And on the other side of the negotiating table will be all the companies negotiating together. So Uber, Lyft, anybody else in that space. And together, they will come to terms around acceptable work conditions, pay, benefits for the whole sector, not company by company. So they won't be saying, well, I'm in an Uber union, Uber has these payment rules. No, they'll set sector-wide standards for pay, benefits, and work conditions. And those will apply to all the companies and even new entrants. So it's called sector-based bargaining. This model, the sector-based model, it's not uncommon, let's say, around the world. You find examples of it in Europe, in Asia. It is more or less unprecedented here in the United States. So we're talking about a sort of first in the nation effort to create a mechanism to allow drivers, gig workers of any kind, to form a union. In terms of how to think about the effects of this, like let's say it passes, there's likely to be a challenge. And a challenge not just from Uber and Lyft, but from sort of union skeptical forces more broadly. The city of Seattle tried to do something similar in 2015. They passed a city ordinance that would have set up a similar kind of sector-based bargaining approach. I believe somebody else is off mute.
Thank you. And even examples. Thank you. I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said?
There we go. And when that ordinance in Seattle passed, it was met with a lawsuit from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in addition to the companies. That lawsuit was successful. It beat back the ordinance. So Massachusetts has learned some things, or I should say the supporters of this ballot question have learned some things from that experience. Some of the mistakes or some of the issues that were raised in the court cases at that time have been addressed here, but I think you should expect a similar kind of legal challenge. If successful, if it passes and the drivers are able to form a union, it should increase wages and benefits for those drivers. So your baseline expectation should be that yes, working conditions will improve, wages and benefits will improve. And that's not just because unions generally have this effect. It's also because the ballot question is written in such a way to emphasize the importance of that outcome. The ballot question doesn't just say we want to allow unionization. It says we want to allow unionization so that drivers have better working conditions and higher pay. You see this in a number of provisions across the ballot question. I should say this is a 30-page ballot question. This is a very detailed regulatory framework, but it's clear that the aim is to improve working conditions. What is not explicitly laid out is a similar commitment to reducing costs for riders or ensuring the health of the industry at large or the availability of cars. Like those things are not explicit goals here. And your expectation, just as it should be that you see increased wages and benefits for drivers, is increased costs for riders, which limits some proven or is likely to limit some proven benefits. So we know from a variety of studies that the rideshare industry has, for instance, helped reduce drunk driving incidents, has had kind of big benefits in that area and other forms of consumer benefit. And I think you should expect a limitation in those benefits if this passes, because riders will be asked to pay more, so there'll be less use of the services. The last thing to know about this ballot question, as I say, it is a 30-page ballot question. And it's got lots and lots of regulatory details. And it's very hard to know how much those details are going to matter. But they could matter. They could matter a lot. But it's hard to predict. So I'll give just an example. This is an industry well known for its flexibility, the flexibility it allows for drivers. If you want to drive for Uber one weekend a month or one weekend a year, you can do that. You can sign up, drive for a few hours, and never again. Well, do you get to vote for a union if you do that? Do you get to vote for the contract? So that is a question that has to get settled. It does get settled in the framework. And the way it gets settled is basically only the most active drivers get to participate in the selection of a union. And you don't need that many of them to get union representatives. You need 25% support from effectively half the drivers, or 12.5% overall support from drivers. That's a very low threshold for creating a union. Does that matter? It's unclear. You could end up, it's at least theoretically possible here, that you end up with a union that has minority but not strong majority support, and then what happens? So there's some hard to predict elements having to do with the regulatory details of the framework, and that I can't imagine expecting voters to sift through.
Okay.
I'll stop there. Take any
For the
questions.
whole questions, I want you to go into the.
You want me to go right to question 5?
And then they can ask questions on both.
Got it. All right. So deep breath, I guess. Totally different question, totally different topic.
This is a whole different thing.
Yeah. So question 5 is about the tipped minimum wage. And I should say what it is not about is raising the minimum wage. This is not a question about raising the minimum wage. Tipped workers in Massachusetts are already guaranteed the minimum wage. They get $15 an hour, just like everybody else. There is no such thing as a sub-minimum wage. You hear terms like that, but it doesn't comport with reality. If you're a tip worker, you get $15. The key difference is you don't necessarily get the $15 from your employer. You can get some of it from tips. So think of restaurant workers, and it's fair to think of restaurant workers, wait staff, because restaurant workers make up somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of all tip workers. There are also folks in salons, manicurists. There are other examples, but it's fair, I think, to just think of the restaurant worker as the prototypical tipped worker here in Massachusetts. So you work in a restaurant, you're a wait staff. Your boss can pay you as little as $6.75 an hour, provided you're getting the other $8.25 in tips. If you're not, then your boss has to pay you the difference. That's the current rule. If question 5 passes, then your employer, the restaurant, will have to pay you the full $15, and you can get tips on top of that, right? At least that's part 1, I would say, of question 5 is the businesses will have to pay the full minimum wage. Tips can come on top. There's a part 2, though. Part 2 is once restaurants pay the full minimum wage, they can pool tips, they can collect tips, pool them, and share them not just among waitstaff, but among cooks, accountants, any non-management staff associated with the restaurant. So on the one hand, you have the businesses are required to cover the full minimum wage, and workers can get tips on top, but those tips can be pooled and distributed not just with the waitstaff, but more broadly with staff. So in terms of impacts, there are a lot of states, 43 of them, that have a setup like we currently have with a tipped minimum wage, where the business covers part, but not all of the minimum wage, and tips make up the difference. That is the most common way that states organize their restaurant industries. But they are bouncing around these tip levels. So lots of states are saying, you know what, we want businesses to cover an additional $1 or $2 or $3, whatever it is. So you can go and look at what happens in states where businesses are asked to cover more of the minimum wage. And the research is pretty clear. When businesses are asked to cover more, waiters and other tip workers earn more money. So I know that there's a lot of people talking about how this ballot question could actually reduce earnings. That is not consistent with the research. The research suggests when you ask businesses to pay more, workers earn more. Again, not because the minimum wage is going up, but because it really matters who pays. And this additional expense for businesses, it generally has to be covered in some way, right? Like this money is not coming from nowhere. And businesses or restaurants are notoriously low profit, high turnover businesses. So they don't have a giant pile of profits that they can use to cover the additional cost of paying their workers. So the money is going to come from higher prices and service fees, most likely. So again, in terms of dynamics, you should think, yes, probably more money for workers, the typical worker, and that money is going to come from higher prices and more service fees. I mentioned that lots of states have this and they move it around a lot. The key thing to note is that it's been decades since any state eliminated the tip minimum wage. So while it's common to kind of change it, it's very uncommon to go from a system like we have, where you have a tipped wage, to a system like you have in California, where there's no tipped wage, where the businesses cover the full amount, because they've done that way for decades, right? There is no recent example of a state making this transition. So there's some uncertainty about what the impact is going to be. The closest example we have is Washington, D.C., which is not a state, right? It's a pure urban area. There's no rural areas. So you can't study things like that. It's only 2 years into a 5-year phase out. So it's still going through this phase out process. And it has led to some turmoil there. Now, the restaurant industry seems quite healthy. There's no sign of an impact on like reduced hiring, reduced people working in the industry. But what there has been is a huge surge in service fees. Lots of restaurants turning to service fees as a way to finance this. So I do think that you should expect to see that if it passes here, restaurants turn to service fees, and you can see why. It's the simplest response from the restaurant. If your current labor cost system is we'll pay $7 and tips will cover the rest, that won't work anymore. But how about we'll pay $7 and a service fee will cover the rest? That works. That will still be legal. And it was seamless for a restaurant to just say, okay, instead of the 18% tip that we expect, we're just going to add 18% service fees. And I think lots of places will do that. I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions on ballot issue 3 or 5, or Barbara, if you want me to do something else.
Okay, Dennis has a question.
Hi, yes, Evan, thank you for your presentation. So let's say that a restaurant levies an 18% service fee. Is that taxable under Massachusetts law in the local tax?
It is. It is taxable. So there probably will be some small impact on tax collections from this. Nothing huge, but yes, the service fees will be taxable in a way that tips have not been. Well, tips are taxable, as income. Different.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Evan?
Bill looks like he's got a question.
You have a question? Go ahead.
Oh, he doesn't have a
Oh, you
question.
don't have a
You have
question.
to unmute.
Bill, you're muted.
No, who's got the question?
Who has a question?
Bill Boyles.
Oh, Bill does? Okay.
Bill, you can hold down your
There you
space
go.
bar. Yeah.
Where's Bill?
Okay,
Oh, here he is. Okay.
okay. So as far as the service fee goes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So as far as the service fee goes, that's basically going to fall on the people buying the meal. So it looks like one would expect that the cost of meals for the general public are going to go up as a result of this.
I think it depends on whether people substitute the service fee for their tip. So for me, if I go to a restaurant and I see an 18% service fee, maybe I'm just cheap, but I think that's the tip. And maybe I'll tip another 2%, 3% if it's really good service, but I'm not going to tip 20% on top of that. So the actual cost of the meal doesn't change for me at all, right? I would have tipped 20%, and now there's an 18% service fee plus a 2% tip. So no, it's the same for me. It's the same for the restaurant. It's just that the tip, we just call the tip a service fee now, in a weird way. Like I said, there's no guarantee. There's no requirement in the law that restaurants have to do this, but I think this is the most seamless way for them to comply with the new rules if this passes. So it's the most likely thing that diners will see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And we have a question from Peter Wiggins. Peter.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Peter J. Wiggins, the mayor of Norton, and I go to restaurants and I frequent the restaurants, the Fresh Catch in Mansfield, go to the pub in Norton, and various restaurants in Norton, and I'm voting no on question number 5. Right?
Okay.
I mean, it's less of a question than
No, it's exactly a question. This is true. Evan, I don't have an exact question, but I notice in the restaurants that I do go to, they all have big signs no. So and this is across the board. I'm noticing it.
Yeah, restaurants are strongly opposed. And I think one reason is that they are very financially fragile as an industry. And while I'm making the argument here that I think there is a solution, it's the solution we see in Washington, anything that changes the way they operate is a risk in a vulnerable industry like they live in. So they would prefer not to make this experiment. And you can understand that, even if what I'm suggesting is like there's a way through this for them. You can understand why they don't want to take that chance.
Well, thank you. Can you stay for a little bit more?
Yeah, I have a few minutes.
Okay.
I had a quick question, Barbara.
Quick. Okay, Cody.
On question 3, my question is generally how the sector-based model union negotiations work, and if you've got, let's say, a low participation, you said like a 12.5% participation rate. I've got a buddy that drives for Uber, but he does it on a as he wants to basis. He's not particularly in favor of this because he doesn't see that it's going to necessarily benefit him. My question is, logistically, if you've got, let's say, even 20% are unionized, and the negotiations between the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, do all drivers receive the benefit, excuse me, of those negotiations, or is it only the union members that then have higher rates applied to whatever their
Yeah, it's a great question. It would apply to all drivers. In fact, there isn't really such a thing as union member in this universe. You're not required to pay dues. No, this is, I mean, it's not clear exactly how dues will work, but there's no requirement to be a union member to get union benefits here.
Dangerous.
The drivers, sorry, Peter, can you mute, Peter? Thank you. So
finish his answer, please.
So the drivers will all be covered under the agreement that is set between the union and the contractors, regardless of their feelings about the union. They don't have to sign on. And in some ways, you could say they'll be subject to it even if they don't like it, even if they vote against it. They won't be able to work around it in any way.
Just a follow-up on that. If you know, currently, I mean, the entire business model of Uber and Lyft is essentially they're all independent contractors. They get to work in however they see fit. As an insurance professional, my immediate thought is what happens now? Do they become employees? Do they get benefits? Is there workers' compensation requirements? Are all the vehicles now fleet vehicles and Uber and Lyft have to cover the insurance for them? Like, how does that work?
So they will not be considered employee, right? They still will maintain their independent contractor status, but it is totally unclear what the terms of work will be because they will be negotiated. And the kinds of things you're talking about will be subject to negotiation between the parties. So it is definitely possible that you'll see a regularization of employment through the union process, but it's not something you can predict because it will depend on the preferences of drivers and their union reps. But yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that I think like the most likely outcome is a long court battle that maybe lasts so long that this industry goes away and we have robo taxis. Like it's the likelihood of a protracted court battle, I think, is maybe the surest outcome here. But if that doesn't happen and there is unionization, it's very hard to predict because it will depend on the terms of the negotiation and the kinds of things you're talking about, like workers' comp, owned vehicles, stuff like that, could theoretically anyway be included in negotiations.
Is there any sense that, you know, right now Uber and Lyft operate independently of each other, they're direct competitors. I will regularly go between the two apps and figure out which one is the cheapest. Whenever you now have collective bargaining and you have both Uber and Lyft at the same table talking to the same group of union reps, is there a decrease to the overall competition in the market? And will you see almost like a standardization like New York cab fares, where you're going to end up, you know, paying the same rate regardless of the provider that you choose?
So for sure, they will no longer be able to compete on labor costs because those labor costs will be set by contract, and they'll have to compete in other mechanisms. So who knows what that is? Better apps, you know, how much of their profits go to it. But yeah, they won't be able to compete on labor costs. And I should add, it's not just them. If you're a new entrant, you think, you know what, this has ruined the industry. We need a new company doing it differently. No new company will be allowed to come in and do it differently. The minute you are a ride-hail company, a ride-sharing company, you will be subject to the collective bargaining agreement, and you will have to follow all the same rules.
Thank you, Evan.
So, thank you, Evan, so much, and I hope you can stay for a little bit more. So we're going to go to Dennis finally. Dennis is, we all know Dennis, and he, of course, is chair of the Foxborough Democratic Committee. He's a member of the Democratic State Committee, a retired teacher, and a former head of the MTA, the Massachusetts Teachers Association. And he's going to present his views on MCAS, which are the same as MASC. Yes, on they're asking people to do yes on the school MCAS question. So Dennis.
Thank you, Barbara. Hi, everyone. Once again, I want to emphasize that I'm not here representing the Mass Democratic Party in any way tonight. I'm just representing my own views as a 39-year retired member of the public school teaching profession. I did put for you into the chat a little while ago a list of the states that require a test in order for a person to, and I use the word get a diploma. I wouldn't say that states are requiring the test for anyone to earn a diploma. It takes at least 4 years for a person to do that, as we all know, with a lot of work every day. So the idea that whether or not you get a diploma should be predicated upon a single test, in my view, is just patently unfair, not to say kind of patently absurd. In any case, being a history teacher retired, I'd like to give you a little bit of history. And I'd like to start by pointing out that Massachusetts has been #1 in the country in student achievement for many years. Now, there are other entities in the state who would like to take credit for that. And I'll mention one, the Mass Business Alliance for Education, in a few minutes. But I would argue that it was due primarily to the educators who teach those students. They're the ones who are with them every day for their 4 years of education. So I would like you to recall, and I know this won't be difficult for Norton, in 1980, Massachusetts enacted Proposition 2.5 through a ballot initiative. And that proposition eliminated fiscal autonomy for school committees. Now, just to make sure everybody understands that, it used to be, prior to the Proposition 2.5's passage, that every school committee would tell its city council or its town meeting, this is what we need to educate the kids in the community next year. Okay, and that could be cut. It could be cut, but if it was cut, it took 10 taxpayers' lawsuit to get it reinstated. So essentially, school committees could demand the money that they wanted in order to educate the kids in the community. Okay, so of course, once that was eliminated, we then had a situation with 2.5, where property tax in any municipality could only be raised 2.5% over the levy of the previous year as determined by the Commonwealth. And the effect of that, of course, was to cause massive school budget cuts, resulting in huge cuts in staff and student programs. Now, I can tell you from my own experience, the effect of that was we lost a generation of teachers. We lost a generation of teachers. But, what has all this got to do with MCAS? Well, all of those cuts had an impact on the quality of education. How could they not? How could they not? Some subjects were no longer offered at all. Other subjects were cut. Class sizes were increased with staff layoffs. And so over a period of time, beginning in like 1981, you had a situation where there was no predictable revenue stream anymore. Okay, it was a crapshoot. How much are you going to be able to raise taxes in next year? Well, we don't know, so we really can't plan a budget. So if we do plan it, we're going to have to cut it. Okay. Bottom line is that this had a negative effect on learning. This had a negative effect on student morale, staff morale, and, over a few years, it caused some problems. And it was clear that the money wasn't coming through. On top of that, in 1983, Ronald Reagan's his Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, put out the infamous A Nation at Risk report, which said essentially the sky is falling. Okay, the nation is at risk. If anybody was doing this to us from the outside, we'd say they were attacking the United States of America. That's how poor education is. All right, now what this did, I'll be honest, Reagan was interested in providing ammunition to have a negative impact on unions, okay, and to privatize public education. It was with him that privatization of public education began, okay, set the stage for that, okay. Here in Massachusetts in 1993, we had Republican Governor William Weld. Weld had some good things about him, in my opinion, and some very bad things about him, in my opinion. He pushed for education reform, and he was supported by Democrats, like and people who will recognize this name, older people. Tom Birmingham, who at the time was the Senate chair of the Joint Committee on Education, and he was very much in favor of education reform too. Now, there was some reform needed by that time because the schools had slipped because of the lack of funds, the lack of staff, and so forth. Okay, but then into that situation comes, the Mass Business Alliance for Education, MBAE, and I can remember this clearly. I lived through all of it. And the MBAE, who still takes credit for the fact we're #1 in education in Massachusetts to this day, if you look on their website, they came up with something called Every Child a Winner, and that became the framework for the Ed Reform Act of 1993. And MCAS originated with the Ed Reform Act of 1993. Okay. And so MCAS, originally there was debate about it. What was it supposed to do? It was originally intended, I think from the legislative point of view, to test schools, to assess schools and school districts. But it ended up being something that assessed students in a single test, determining whether they got a high school diploma. This is the thing that none of us in public education ever thought was fair. We worked with kids for 4 years. We know in school districts, the teachers know their strengths and weaknesses. They know how to help them. And, it's tragic. It's heartbreaking when somebody doesn't pass the test. And so, we think that the expectations should be different. The expectations should be that there are other ways to make a judgment, other ways to make a judgment about whether a student gets a high school diploma. The price that was exacted in order to get more state money to education was the MCAS as it exists today, prior to the ballot question decision, was an elimination of certification, lifetime certification for teachers. You had to requalify. Teacher tenure was eliminated. I know a lot of people favored that, but it was originally put in so that Jim Smith, head of the school committee in town X, couldn't put his son-in-law into a teaching position over somebody who was highly qualified. That's why that was originally created. The same idea as a civil service exam, that you have people, who are not tied to somebody, but they actually have qualifications to do what they do. But that was eliminated. Teachers had to be tested. When I became principal, I had to take the teacher test. I, who had been in the classroom at that point 33 years, I had to take the teacher test. I was in there with people who were like less than half my age for the most part. It was kind of amusing. I managed to pass. I really did. So now MTA today advocates for the elimination of MCAS as a graduation requirement because they see that, I agree, one size does not fit all. Determining who graduates from high school and who gets a diploma should depend more than on a single test. Okay? It creates a lot of anxiety. It takes a lot of time away from what would be real classroom education. It takes a lot of money that are put into tutoring programs to make sure kids get through so they can get their diploma because of the test. Now, another thing that was created in 1993 was the state curriculum frameworks. The state curriculum frameworks are in place. Every school at every level has to conform to the state curriculum frameworks. That's fine. That's the commonality across the state. This is what kids learn for 4 years. The test is a superfluous, unnecessary, time-consuming, money-consuming, nonsensical idea. And to my mind, it comes from the attitude of the business community as it existed at the time in 1993. Maybe not now to such a great degree, but pass the test and you got everything you're going to need. And I'll tell you, I don't think there are too many, if you look at who was behind the MBAE, okay, the MBAE, again, I'll remind you, was the Mass Business Alliance for Education. They were the primary influence on the legislature when this law was being finalized. And anything that they could get the schools to do that they didn't have to do was going to be just fine. Okay? And here's a quote from what they say to this day on their timeline, on their website. We support greater alignment of learning with real-world expectations, so all students are prepared to be productive citizens, join and lead the workforce. So they're looking to train people to go into the workforce. That's what their primary goal is, okay? And, that's a little narrow from the standpoint of real educators. But that's the kind of influence that came down. So what are you tested on? You're tested on math. You're tested on your writing and English. I can tell you something that was never in MCAS, despite the fact that they say productive citizens. Nothing in there about history, nothing about geography on the MCAS, nothing about government, any of that stuff. Okay, and so what happens? If that's not in the MCAS, that's going out of the curriculum. If you have to cut budgets, you're going to redirect that money somewhere else. So that's the kind of effect that it had. Elective courses in history gone, and I was the history teacher. I saw that happen. So, it's not good for anybody, the MCAS. It's something that needs to go. It's had its day. As far as I'm concerned, it had its day one. And I've been an educator since before MCAS. I started teaching in 1968. MCAS didn't actually get implemented until the mid-80s. Okay. And so, I'm sorry, the mid-90s. And so I saw before, I saw it during, I was a classroom teacher, I administered it, I saw its effect on kids. And as a principal, I saw its effect on the school. I saw its effect on the time that was spent, the amount of money that was spent in prep. So I think I've made my point ad nauseum here. I'm wearing the button. Please vote yes to eliminate it as a requirement for graduation. There will still have to be, under federal law, there has to be a test administered in every school and every school district. It just won't be the final determiner of whether a kid gets a diploma. A final thought. I have a son who suffers from, he's in his mid-40s now, but he suffered from, and still does, dyscalculia. That's a hardwired brain situation where you can't really do math. This was discovered when he was in kindergarten by a very observant kindergarten teacher in Foxborough. And my son would not have gotten a high school diploma. There was no way he would have passed the math test. No way. Okay, and that would have kept him out of state university, where you get a reduced rate. Picture this, every kid with learning disabilities now can't go to state university if you don't have that passed the MCAS. And yet, when he was finished with high school, he did get his diploma, took a year off and worked because he was worn out from dealing with his learning disability, 2 years actually, and then went back first to community college for a year, and then he transferred and got credit for all those credits to a 4-year school, and he graduated cum laude. Think of all of the kids like him today who can't get where they want to go. Can't get where they want to go. And I've talked to any number of people like that. Most recently, at a doctor's office I was at, I struck up a conversation with a young woman and we got talking. I was wearing the button, which gets you to talk to a lot of people. And she said, "Oh, I agree with you," she said. And she told me her story, which was quite similar. Only hers was writing. And she's doing fine. And she's a happy person. But she said she was depressed in high school because she worried all the time that she'd never get her diploma. So I hope you'll join me. I already voted. I voted October 19th because I'm old and I'm not taking any chances. Because I know in Massachusetts, even if you're not here anymore, your vote still counts. So I hope you'll join me, everybody, in voting yes on question 2. Thank you. I'll take any questions if there are any.
I believe Martha, you have a question.
Yeah, Dana, I
Hi,
have a
Martha.
question. Hi, I have a question and then a couple of comments. My first question for you, Dennis, is when did you leave this working in the school system? And
A long time ago, 2004, October.
Okay, so that brings me to my statements. 2004, 20 years ago. I would like to say that I am for keeping MCAS, and that is speaking from the perspective of being in the classrooms at all grades, all levels in Norton as a substitute teacher for 10 out of the last 15 years. And it's also speaking as a parent of a son with a disability who graduated the year you got out of the school system or the year after that. The first comment about the reason why is I have, in working with teachers and eating lunch with teachers and going to different meetings with teachers, I do know, and being in the classrooms with them, because I was often in the classrooms with those teacher assistants, so I got to see how the teachers work.
Sorry, Martha, is there a question in there? I just want to make sure I'm not missing it.
No,
Okay.
I want to talk. I already asked my question and got my answer. I want to talk to the other side of the
But
issue.
I didn't give you the full answer based on where you want to go, okay? And my answer is this, okay? I have been an active member of the Mass Teachers Association since I retired and for all my career before I retired. I go and communicate with teachers from all over the country annually at conferences. I'm still friendly with people in the schools where I taught. That's Douglas, that's Norton, and that's also Millis, where I spent most of my career. Okay, I talk to those people all the time. So I didn't want to leave you with the wrong impression, that's all.
No, okay. And I had a bumper sticker on my car about 8 years ago, maybe it's only 7 years ago, that said fewer tests, because we wanted fewer tests because it was taking up way too much time in the classrooms and way too much time for the teachers. However, in the past, I don't know, 15 years or so, I would say that the MCAS test has changed and evolved from what it used to be. And it can be worked on to make it better and better and better. And when you read the detail in the booklet, it was only 700 students that had trouble passing it. And I
Only?
have what? In the state.
I'm sorry, I think of all those people as an individual life, not a number, but anyway.
Oh yeah. And it does say that there is another way to get through it. The students can retake the test, and that's when they start taking it in elementary school and then in middle school and then again sophomores in high school, they know that they can take it again junior year and senior year, and they can take whatever tutoring or summer courses they need to help them to pass it. If and there are other things they can do. There's a performance cohort appeal, where they can demonstrate a certain level and they can still pass it. So there are all these exceptions there. And it's not just taking a test one time. As having watched the students and monitored the students taking these tests throughout, they get used to it. They get accustomed to it. They adapt. Those with high test anxiety, even those students adapt to it. They might have something in the back of their heads that they worry about passing. And I know that my son was concerned about passing because he has a disability. He was in special classes with Peter, right? Peter Wiggins. And he was concerned that he would not pass the MCAS. And sophomore year, he passed it on the first try. And the kind of confidence that gave him, I don't know as he could have gotten it any other way. And he went on, and he's an officer in the National Guard, and he takes courses, and he got an associate's degree. And I don't know how he would have felt if he hadn't have felt equal to those that were good enough to pass the test. So that I think it is an achievement. It's a measurable achievement. And if we did away with it, there would be nothing there until they came up with a test to replace it. And to recreate the wheel is not necessary. Let's just work with what we've got, add what we think should be needed, delete what we think should be deleted, and keep what works. So I'm saying, let's not get rid of it and vote no.
Well, actually, Martha, it is not, if you vote yes on question 2, it does not get rid of the MCAS. What it does do is get rid of the MCAS tied to graduation.
Right.
So the MCAS will still be administered, but it will not. And one of the things that others who are no on this, they say that each district will have a criteria for allowing the
Um,
kids to graduate.
I
And
have
some
one
people-
more thing.
But this
One
is,
more thing about that is I have a concern about lawsuits because right now the teachers in the school systems are backed by the state because of the MCAS requirement. And once that's done away with, then every teacher in every school system, I imagine, I don't know for sure, but I imagine will be open for lawsuits.
I actually can't answer that question, but that may be true.
I don't, frankly, I don't even understand that question, but I would just share, and, just someone whose name we all know, Ayanna Pressley, said this: "For someone like myself who was a poor test taker, if educators had not realized who I was holistically and wanted to invest and nurture and cultivate and encourage my leadership skills, I don't know where I'd be today." This is a congresswoman from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She's just one story. There are a zillion stories out there that students can tell. And I don't doubt that, Martha, you've had positive experiences, where your son is concerned, and I'm happy to hear that. But they aren't all like that. Trust me, I know.
Okay, I see that, Peter, I know you have a quick question, but can you hold that question? Because I need to get to the person from the psychedelic. Is that okay for you, Peter?
Okay.
Yeah, do you have a quick question? You can ask your quick question, but we're running out of some time here.
Yeah, Barbara, that would be good because I have to hop off too.
Right, everybody too. Can you?
That's right. I remember taking the MCAS test when I was in school, and I passed with flying colors. Right?
Well done, you.
Okay, all right, thank you, Peter. And now I want to get to question 4, limited legalization and regulation of certain psychedelic drugs. Our presenter is Graham Moore, and he is from the Mass for Mental Health Organization. So Graham, you're on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for welcoming me here. I'm going to try to be quick so I can open it up to questions and make the best use of everybody's time. Hopefully this isn't controversial, right?
Right, no, Graham, I just want to mention to everyone that the organization that Graham comes from has sent me literature. So in addition to his presentation tonight, I can forward you some literature. Okay, go ahead, Graham.
Sounds great. And I may also send some additional material to forward around. So hopefully this isn't controversial. What a vote yes on question 4 will do is it will remove criminal penalties for personal use, including growing of 5 psychedelic substances. In addition, over the course of a 2-year period, it's going to create a regulated therapeutic access program, which will allow people to go to essentially clinics and pay to be administered these substances under professional supervision. What will not happen in this measure is there's no dispensaries. It's not like medical cannabis. It's not like cannabis. You can't purchase the drugs and take them home with you. And in fact, by law, if you're going to one of these clinics, you have to have 3 appointments. So you actually have to come in for a session to prepare you for taking the medicine. Then you take it under supervision. And then even after that, you have to, by law, come in for a 3rd appointment and have an integrative therapy session along with that. I think the really important things to know here is that all of the provisions of this policy have already been found to be safe in the real world. So all of the things that the opposition is talking about happening have never happened anywhere, including in this state. So in 8 cities and towns in Massachusetts, encompassing over 390,000 residents, cities have passed resolutions allowing for personal use of these substances. They're called deprioritization measures, but in effect, they've locally decriminalized growing, possessing, and sharing these substances. So those cities are all across the state: Amherst, Provincetown, Northampton, East Hampton, Medford, Salem, Cambridge, Somerville. Did I miss one? Well, anyway, there's 8, and there hasn't been any observed explosion of the black market, increase in DUIs, increase in hospitalizations. In fact, we talked to a researcher who looked into it, and across all 8 of those places, in any given year, there were less than 10 psychedelic incidents. And I don't mean like 10 per city. I mean like if you add up Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, et cetera, it's like across all of that, there would be 10 hospitalizations or arrests related to psychedelics. And everywhere in the world, these are a very minor public health thing. In Colorado, where they passed basically the same measure as ours, actually a less restrictive measure than ours that allowed the personal use and also had the regulated access. Similarly, before and after decriminalization, essentially the same with hospitalizations and arrests. In fact, hospitalizations related to psychedelics in Colorado are lower now than they were in 2020 before they passed the measure. And DUIs, impaired driving, fatal DUIs in Colorado actually decreased substantially. I don't think they're connected, but the point being is you can be assured that in this country, in other countries, this has never been a thing where decriminalizing these substances leads to a bunch of hospitalizations or psychosis or any of the stuff these people are worried about. This measure has been endorsed by over 290 and counting healthcare experts, including MDs from McLean Hospital, MGH, Dana-Farber, and Brigham and Women's, as well as by arguably the world's foremost psychedelics researcher, Matthew Johnson. That's really getting into the weeds, but all of the credentials in terms of the medical expertise are on our side of the equation, despite the fact that some medical organizations have come out in opposition. And this effort is being driven by and for patients like myself. So I suffered from severe OCD. I used psilocybin in consultation with my psychiatrist to get better. And I've also been a caregiver for 2 loved ones with severe suicidal depression, including my best friend who died by suicide. So I've seen the conventional psychiatric system from the patient side, from the caregiver side. I also have a family member who's a psychiatrist and friends who are doctors. So I'm really familiar with what the existing treatments can do, and they don't work very well. And for many people, the things that we're going to make available through this measure do work exceptionally well. So we're trying to do something that's been proven to be safe for public health and that promising research from medical institutions across the world suggests can be really groundbreakingly effective for people. And we're not having retail sales. So the idea here is stop arrests of people in the community who aren't bothering anybody, but encourage a model of use, of responsible use that's supervised, that maximizes the therapeutic benefit. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Oren Siegel has a question for you, Graham.
I'm somewhat confused. I understand the need to decriminalize it. I understand the regiment you have gone through in terms of having professionals oversee the use of it. But then when you add on, people can grow it in their homes for independent use. There's no tie to being prescribed by anybody or getting supervised in its use. And there's a real disconnect. On the one hand, it's very heavily regulated when you go through the regulations. You have to go there 3 times. But you add, I don't know why you added on this other provision to basically say home free all. And if there's a real issue with the use of that drug, and I'm not familiar with it at all, I'm open to having it decriminalized. That doesn't make any sense at all, especially with the regulated use of it and its prescription by people who know what they're doing. But to open it up to have everybody do it in their own homes just seems to be counter to the whole rest of the argument of why you have to regulate it so strongly.
So I hear that, and I'm frustrated with some of the way this has been communicated because, as I said before, this decriminalization, including home grow, has already happened in Massachusetts and hasn't caused issues, and hasn't caused issues in other countries. The regulated framework is there to keep vulnerable people as safe as possible when they're using these things therapeutically. But in terms of the risk to public health or even individual health when used responsibly, these substances, with one exception, are very safe. And what was I going to say? And the home grow is an integral part of decriminalization. So the question people are being asked, this is really important, is not should or should not people use psychedelics in the community. People are already using them. People are already growing them. The question is it a good use of law enforcement resources to arrest people who are doing this if they're not selling it? Because selling and buying on the street will remain illegal. If you don't have home grow, but you decriminalize personal use, what you're telling people who are seeking to access this and will continue to seek to access this, again, people have been accessing this, they will continue to seek to access it. You're telling them that the only way they can access it is either waiting for regulated access in 2 years or going to drug dealers. drug dealers who are criminals, who are making money off of illicit activity, who might introduce them to more dangerous substances, who might give them adulterated substances, or might abuse them while under the influence. So the home grow is really important to have an alternative to the black market, which already exists. There's already a black market. There's going to continue to be a black market. We're not having any retail sales. But the home grow is very important to have an alternative to that for people who are already seeking to access this. And again, people already are, because the existing treatments don't work very well. And for many people, these do. So in observational and clinical studies, just 1 or 2 doses of these substances has been associated, and I'm using that word very carefully, associated with months or years of clinically significant relief. And the reason I say associated is because until you have a large enough sample size, you can't prove causality. But what nobody can dispute is that people have taken psilocybin 1 or 2 times and their addiction to alcohol has gone away. People have taken psilocybin 1 or 2 times and their depression has gone to remission rapidly. So as long as that's what people are experiencing, a relief from their mental health symptoms without needing daily medication, without experiencing a bunch of harmful side effects that they get from psychiatric meds, people are going to continue to access these. We think that decriminalization, including of home grow, is going to make this activity safer in the Commonwealth. And to go on a little bit longer, this is not a theoretical thing. So people are already seeking to access psychedelic therapy. I know somebody personally who came to me because they were going to go get underground therapy for $2,500. I told them not to do it because I didn't trust this person. It was too much money. And similarly, I know somebody who was extorted for money by an underground drug dealer and facilitator. They took psilocybin from this person and they thought it was for free. And then later this person was threatening to tell their employer and get them in trouble if they didn't pay them hundreds of dollars. So decriminalization, including of home grow, keeps people safer, especially vulnerable people who are using these substances. So I understand why it scares people. But again, if you look to Colorado, it hasn't caused problems. Look to Cambridge and Somerville or all these places here, it hasn't caused problems. That's why it's in here.
So how do people get it to start to grow it? Where do they get it from if they haven't been prescribed by somebody? So
I love to go into this because it really surprises people. So the existing laws don't really discourage this very much at all. So psilocybin mushroom spores are federally legal, and they are legal in the state of Massachusetts. In California, they've banned them, but Massachusetts has left that loophole wide open for forever because it's not a problem. But in Massachusetts, you can legally purchase psilocybin mushroom spores and order them to your house, completely legal. It only becomes illegal once you grow them, but the spores are legal. Similarly, mescaline-containing cacti in Massachusetts are already legal to grow in your house. It's just illegal to eat it, unless it's peyote. But a certain kind of mescaline-containing cactus is legal unless you eat it. Eating it, illegal. Growing it, possessing it, selling it, legal. Same thing with a DMT-containing plant. So the existing laws prohibiting growing of these things are very weak anyway. This is just bringing the laws in line with sort of what's already happening. And again, making people safer who are doing this, make it easier for them to be transparent with their healthcare providers, with their loved ones about what's going on. So yeah. Not everybody's going to be for this, but this is why we're doing it. And I think it's important to mention the American Medical Association's official stance is that personal substance use should be a health issue, not a criminal issue. And again, it's not just me, Graham Moore, working for the campaign telling you this. We're going to have our big medical press conference tomorrow. We have doctors from leading hospitals across the state who have endorsed, including people who have actually administered psychedelics in a clinical setting for research. So we have a lot of people.
I'm sure those doctors are anxious to have it decriminalized, but I would also suspect that they would also endorse at least having somebody prescribe it, even if they don't go through this regimen, for making sure that it's being used properly. That's my own thought, and that's really making me uncomfortable with the proposed ballot question. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Graham. We appreciate your coming on.
I had one quick question for Graham, if we've got a couple minutes.
Sure.
Graham, you mentioned one exception. There were,
yeah.
I think,
the one
5.
exception is ibogaine, the African psychedelic. So the good news about ibogaine is it's not fun and it's not used personally pretty much anywhere. So it's kind of in there symbolically. And sure, this isn't going to be perfect, right? I think it's important to pass this because if it doesn't pass, we can't do anything for 2 election cycles for 6 years in Massachusetts. But ibogaine is essentially included in the personal use symbolically because it's hard to grow, like really hard. It's not fun, so it's not a street drug anywhere. And it's also more dangerous. The reason ibogaine is included in this measure is because it has unique utility for treating opioid use disorder. So ibogaine is used as a prescription medication in New Zealand as we speak to treat opioid use disorder. And what ibogaine can uniquely do is eliminate withdrawal symptoms. So it's very, very uniquely effective in dealing with opioid addiction, which obviously kills people. And so a lot of people turn to ibogaine as a last resort legally in Mexico or in where else, in Costa Rica, to treat opioid addiction. We want to make that available here in a controlled setting. The decriminalization is kind of symbolic because we don't anticipate anybody using it. Ibogaine, despite being the most dangerous of the substances, is also the most widely decriminalized. It's decriminalized in Germany, I believe. In Australia, it's decriminalized, including growing. In Mexico, it's decriminalized, including growing. Nobody really uses ibogaine outside of a controlled setting because it's not fun. But that is the exception. All the other substances, you're not going to overdose on them. In Australia, over 23 years, there are only 10 documented deaths linked to psilocybin, and that includes people like hurting themselves, accidentally or whatever. So while people can tell you very scary stories about these substances, actual severe adverse effects are extremely rare. For example, a population study in the United States found no connection between classic psychedelics and psychosis. It doesn't mean it can't cause psychosis. It just means it's extremely rare and not statistically significant. Again, ibogaine's a little bit more dangerous, but it's not a concern of people using it on the street. And none of these substances are addictive.
Thank you.
Just one thing just to clarify, Graham, if you don't mind, Barbara, you mentioned that it couldn't come up for another 2 years. Are you talking about a ballot initiative? Or is that what prohibits it?
Yeah, so a ballot initiative.
But it can come up by the legislature themselves. So if they wanted to come back and just legislate its non-criminalization for the first stage of this, they could do that, correct?
They could. I don't anticipate them doing it, but yes, they could. They could.
So again, Graham, thank you so much. I think this is a subject that most of us really didn't know a lot about, and you've certainly helped to for us to understand it before. I know some people have voted, but those of us who have not yet voted, it's very helpful. And I definitely want to thank Ellen and her group from Attleboro for joining up. I think this has been a session that was informative for everyone.
I realize I have two other quick things I have to plug, okay? We've been endorsed by disabled...
Okay.
Yeah, that's really quick. We've been endorsed by Disabled American Veterans of Massachusetts, an organization representing over 60,000 disabled veterans in our state, and we've also been endorsed by Elizabeth Warren. I think that's just important to mention for Democrats if it makes people feel more comfortable. With that, I will close. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Ellen, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
No, just that, like you, I thought this was very informative, and I'm glad that we could put this on, and I think hopefully it's been very helpful for everybody.
Thank you, and thank you for getting the auditor. I see she's quite energetic about her case. I will, since some of the speakers that we had, I will send them a thank you, but thank you to all of you for my group and from your group for participating.
And ours.
And vote. If you haven't voted, make sure that that you vote. This is the important thing. I know we're all very nervous about the upcoming election, so we'll all be in touch to talk about that. And it's coming up how many days?
Week.
One week. 1 week. Okay. 1 week, and we will find out the results of the presidential contest. So if anyone has one other thing to say, I will say good night and thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.